But reports have kind of this unfortunate reputation for being boring. Right, this is the 5th report I am giving here in Burlington. It's been a blessing to be here for 5 years. But reports don't have to be boring. And particularly when God moves, it's not boring. And I firmly believe that God moved in this last year. Now, that's something I'm supposed to say as a pastor, right? And I hope it's not lip service, because I believe that God did things this last year. Our emphasis was on Isaiah chapter 43, verse 19, where it says, "For I am about to do something new. See, I have already begun. Do you not see it? I will make a pathway through the wilderness. I will create rivers in the dry wasteland." God will do that. Now, new does not mean something that's never been done. It means fresh, something that's rejuvenated. And God did new things this last year. But when we look at ourselves, it can be real easy to find areas to be discouraged, because the state of the church in North America is not a real encouraging place right now. And if you look at our church specifically, in 2010, our average worship attendance was 172. In 2015, it was 141. And we kind of hovered there until COVID, and 2 years ago it was 92, this last year it was 96. And so that can be a hard reality for us to sometimes grapple with. But if we look back over this last year, numbers don't always tell the full story, but there are certain numbers that I think are worth highlighting. In this last year, we had 5 salvations, 3 baptisms, and 1 baby dedication. And that's exciting, that's fun to talk about. But one of the things about this is every individual, all those numbers represent an individual that's under the age of 16, which does 2 things. First off, it shows us the importance of investing in the next generation. We got to make sure we don't sacrifice that. But number 2, it says we need to find better ways to reach people who are over 16. To how do we share Jesus in other contexts? Now, our mission is to impact the world with love and message of Jesus Christ, and we do that through various ways. We have various teams, various volunteer positions where people sacrificially give of their time, and many of you do that. And we try to be creative in how we do things. But as I look back on this last year, and I see the impact that we've had, I'm reminded of something I said last year in my report. Because if you remember, I need to emphasize this more, but I didn't. That sometimes subtle changes can make all the difference. And when we talk about something like our social media presence, recording videos going from here to here changes our impact tenfold. A little change. Now, it's not hard to move my camera from like this to this. And some of you are young enough and like, well, duh, that's an easy thing to do. Like you should have been doing that beforehand. But the reality is, sometimes we get so stuck and we're going to do it this way, that even if we just make a minor change, Jesus can have a greater impact. And so it's important that we recognize that what we've done things that are good, but how can Jesus use it more effectively? How can he do even greater things among us? And now this new that we talk about is not getting rid of the old, because changing from horizontal to vertical on the camera is not really changing much. Because God can use what we've done in the past, and he can use it as we move into the future. And we are a church, if we're known for one thing, it's we're the church that sells sweet corn. Right? That's a reputation we have. And one thing, we can say that with pride because we don't sell sweet corn to pay the light bills. We sell sweet corn to fund mission work. Right? We do that. And I want to say thank you to Dan and Lori Miller and Randy and Kathy Clark for their work last year, and I hope this year too. But I know some of the work's already been done. But and the 69 different people that volunteered. 69 different people helped with our sweet corn ministry. And last year we had 7 days of picking. $15,735.70 was raised for missions. And last year was our 25th year. In 25 years, we've raised $227,484.80. That's crazy. And now, if you haven't helped with sweet corn, you got to do it at least once in your lifetime. All right? I would say once you start, you can't stop. Oh man, I don't know. It's it's hard work. It's honest work. Let's go with that one. But that's something our church is known for, because we're not doing it for ourselves. We're doing it for Jesus and for His kingdom. But we can look about the other ministries in our church. We can look at B1 Neighbor, led by Tracy Poffenbarger, and we see that averaged 49 families a month this year, I think. And that was because that number is so low because the beginning of the year was low. Yeah, this is a ministry where the financial and volunteer needs are greater, and we can have a greater impact with that. Hannah Alexander, that led our Be One Kind ministry, that displayed random acts of kindness throughout our community. Jessica Clover, who led Be One Family, that sponsored and organized several different events for our church. Nora Spiker, who led Be One Women, and make sure you watch the video again to get a screenshot of the Remember When picture, but anyway. Led events for the women, and Mark Watterson led events and prayer breakfast for the men once a month. We have Charlie and Nancy Corns, who led our Be One Blessed ministry, and they averaged over 200 people a month that they helped with clothes. Right? That's a need in our community. Our First Impressions team is led by Candace Dameron, and B1 Missions led by Randy Clark. And this report of mine is we'll have hard copies if you want to be emailed tomorrow. But the missions report, the youth report are also included in there, and there just wasn't enough room to include all the things that Randy had already included in the missions report. Make sure you check that out, as well as the youth report with Kelsey Thompson. One thing about Kelsey, last year our board set some goals. And we had some goals for the youth. And then I don't know if it was the very next meeting or the meeting after that, Kelsey's kind of like, we already reached our goal. And and it was not a small goal, it was a big goal. And so that was fun. Our B1 kids, and we have many volunteer for this during the sermon, for Sunday school on Wednesday nights. So thank you for those who volunteer to help lead that. And we have our landscaping, the flowers, the mowing. And, landscaping is one of those things that you notice when it doesn't look good. But there are many people that give to help with that. And so we can think of our different ministries and our teams that we have throughout. And when we talk about reports, we have this wonderful building that God has given us. And sometimes it can be a little uninspiring to talk about the building, but I think we'd be remiss not to recognize what God was able to do. Because the last fiscal year is when we got our new roof. Because of an insurance claim, every building of the church, except the sanctuary area, got a new roof. Right? I mean, the edge, the south wings, the houses, the garage. And the insurance claim paid for most of it. We upgraded the material. And so essentially for $181,594.50 for the total cost of the project, we only had to pay $12,000. For that, right? That God provided for us in that way. We got a new drum set over there. That's exciting, right? It is, right? And it helps us. But in February, we redid the whole stage front wall along with the drum set. And our screen, that big screen that was up there, was a motored screen, and those things are super expensive. And the thing had broken. The motor had gone out, and so what the board decided that we're going to make it so the cross is visible 100% of the time, right? I want to make sure. And so now we have two projectors and everything, but that cross, 100% of the time, we can see it, and so we can always keep our eyes fixed upon what Jesus is doing. We also upgraded the nursery in room number 2. We got a new church van. Just God did certain things for us and through us. In March, we sold the house at Greenbrier. And part of this was because of the repairs that the house needed, as well as the resignation of Chris Van Buskirk as the worship director. And understanding the uniqueness of the position, the board decided to sell the house and use those funds to help pay a part-time salary for the individual. But I do want to say, Chris, his resignation was at the end of August last year, so I want to say thank you to Chris for his work as the worship director. I know it was over a decade. I don't know if it was quite 13 years, but I think it was at least 12 in this time. So, Chris, I want to say thank you for your work, faithfulness and dedication with that. I also want to say thank you to Hannah Alexander, Mark Watterson, and Sam Thompson, oh, there you is, Sam, for as they've stepped in from the interim to help with our worship and to lead at that. So thank you for that. But I do want to mention that our worship, our songs don't happen by accident, right? It's not it's just not randomly. Like there are people that every week they practice, they prepare, they give of their time, their gifts, the energy to make it so we can worship together. Now there are people on stage. You see them, make sure you thank them and show them your appreciation. But there are also people upstairs. We have Sarah Van Buskirk, Lisa Roundtree, and Bree Watterson up there today. Randy Clark is often up there. I know Ephraim Gutierrez has been getting up there as well. You don't see them, but if they mess up, you notice it. and if there's something that's off, you notice it. You don't see them, but make sure you thank them and show them your appreciation for that. And over this last year, our leadership has kind of focused on three different things. One is kind of the business side of things, like the new roof and that type of stuff. Another is more strategy, mission focused. And so we've asked the question, what does it look like for a person to go from a first-time visitor of B1AS to a fully committed follower of Jesus invested in the mission of B1AS? What does that look like? How do we answer that question? Because if we don't answer that question, we're all going to be going in different directions. We're all going to be, and when we go in different directions, we frustrate each other. This person maybe do something that's good, this person maybe do something that's good, but they're not working together, and so we frustrate each other. How do we answer this question in a way that's compelling, in a way that helps people draw closer to Jesus? But the third thing was focusing on is the spiritual health. The board went through the book Fresh Wind, Fresh Fire by Jim Cymbala. If you haven't read it, it's a great book. But one of the things that he talks about in the book is the church is not to be a place where we just have great preaching or we have high production worship services. The church is to be the place where people encounter the Almighty God. That's what we're doing here, right? We're seeking Jesus. And so through this book, we were led to start the Wednesday night prayer meeting. And, prayer meeting is not something that's new, right? I don't know when prayer meeting officially would say you started it, but God did new things in us through that. But as we look back on our last fiscal year, which is June 1st to May 31st, I would say the spiritual story for our church in the last fiscal year begins with God's transformational work in Lori Miller on July 13th, 2022. That for 7 years she was in bondage. And honestly, that was the only Lori I knew. And so people, when after July 13th, people would make comments like, "This is the real Lori," or "Lori's back." And Dan, infamously now, said, "I got my old wife back." And then on July 24, 2022, Lori shared her testimony here on stage. And you can go back and watch that still and listen to it still. But God was doing new things. And as I said, we started prayer meeting. That was in August. And prayer meeting, if those who were coming, if we're honest, it took a while to find a rhythm. But once we did, God moved. And God consistently broke into our prayer meetings, showing that He was doing new things. Now in January, I look back on our year, and in January, I feel that our worship services started to have a different vibe. In December and then in January. And God was up to something, and people were noticing. And as I look back on this, I recognize that it wasn't because of the preaching. And one of the reasons I believe that is I don't think anybody in here could remember what the name of the sermon series was starting in January. And the reason, can anybody do that? Anybody know what I preached on?
Was it against the grain?
It was not.
Oh.
That was in the summer, a book on Judges. Yeah, thank you. The fall was the fruit of the Spirit. The Advent was God with us. The Lent was resurrection type stories. See, one of the reasons I was very confident nobody would be able to answer that is because I couldn't remember. It was Limitless Life, if you really want a trivia question there. But the fact of the matter is, God was moving. And we were getting a sense of God is up to something. Right? And in February, God started really doing stuff. On February 12th, 2023, we had our prayer time was for those seeking healing of some sort. Our front was filled. And I'll never forget David Watterson sitting over here, being anointed for Charlie Corns. Charlie had been bedridden for a long time at that point. And so we prayed for Charlie. After that day, on February 12th, 2023, Charlie was a different person. He started eating to the point where Nancy couldn't keep enough food in the house. He started getting up, starting to walk a little bit with a walker a little bit. And so we see that God was doing new things. Now we recognize that today is June 25th, 2023. This past Wednesday, on June 21st, 2023, Charlie Corns passed away and went to be home with the Lord. So we recognize God's doing new things, but that our bodies are limited. That the new things is not just that we get to live this life indefinitely, but that God is calling us out of this life into His new things. You see, on February 26, 2023, Nancy Lowe came to the altar right over here during the song Jesus Loves Me by Chris Tomlin. And she got up after that, testified to having struggles with worth as well as struggles in her marriage. And Eric stood beside her on stage, and God was doing a great work in their lives. Now, God's not done with Eric or Nancy in the same way He's not done with me or any of you. But God is doing new things. On April 9th, Easter Sunday, I got the privilege of, in our baptistry right back there, baptizing Xander Roundtree, Cadence Clover, and Mila Clover. Praise the Lord for that. I had the privilege of standing right here and dedicating Nathaniel Oldfield on that same day. God was doing new things in and through us. And so as we think about the new things that God has done and is doing, it should inspire and motivate us. You see, the new work that God is doing is not because any of us are special. It's because He has invited us to participate with what He's doing in this world. And so I've been brought to the concept of a pearl. And in Matthew chapter 13, verse 45 and 46, Jesus says, "And the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant on the lookout for choice pearls. When he discovered a pearl of great value, he sold everything he owned and bought it." Now, pearls have value. Right? Even today, pearls have value. But in Jesus' day, they didn't have a way to manufacture or even cultivate pearls like we do. The only way for them to obtain a pearl was to extract it from a wild oyster. Now, the cultivation process today takes less time and produces a greater number of pearls. But even so, a lot of the oysters don't actually produce pearls in the cultivation process, and many of them actually die. They estimate that about 1 in 10,000 oysters in the wild contain a pearl, and only a small number of those pearls are deemed suitable for actual jewelry use. See, Jesus is drawing a parallel between the value of a priceless pearl to that of the kingdom of heaven. When you find something of value, you give everything you have for it. The kingdom of heaven has such value that nothing compares to it, and we are called to give our life to it. Now, pearls form through a long and difficult process that I'm sure we're at least somewhat familiar with. What typically happens is some foreign threat, a piece of sand, a rock, a bacteria of some sort, enters the oyster shell. And the delicate nature of the oyster requires that this foreign threat becomes smooth as to not irritate the oyster. And so what happens is the oyster secretes this stuff called nacre and then covers it with aragonite, forming a calcium carbonate coating. That over time, this coating hardens, and then more coating gets on, it hardens, and it grows and grows through that process. And so eventually, this foreign threat becomes transformed into what we refer to as a pearl today. Now, pearls have a few other instances where they are mentioned throughout the New Testament, and talking about the new heavens and the new earth. In Revelation chapter 21, verse 21, it says, "The 12 gates were 12 pearls, each gate made of a single pearl. The great street of the city was of gold, as pure as transparent glass." Now, if we think of the new heavens and new earth, the measurements that are kind of given to it is about 1,400 miles long by 1,400 miles wide. I think it's 1,400 miles high, too, so it's a big cube, right? So I don't know if each gate goes from top to bottom. It's a 1,400-mile pearl. But the fact of the matter is that the new heavens and new earth is a large place with 12 gates, and we see that a pearl is used as the gate. And it's hard for us to really wrap our mind around the size of this. But one of the things that I always find very fascinating when we talk about heaven and what's it going to look like is things like gold, pearls are used as building materials. The things that we find as precious today will be things we walk on in the streets of gold. We're going to walk on gold. That's how little value it will have when we get to heaven. Another place where pearls are mentioned is Matthew 7, 3 through 6. And it says, "And why worry about the speck in your friend's eye when you have a log in your own? How can you think of saying to your friend, 'Let me help you get rid of that speck in your eye,' when you can't see past the log in your own eye? Hypocrites, first get rid of the log in your own eye. Then you will see well enough to deal with the speck in your friend's eye. Don't waste what is holy on people who are unholy. Don't throw your pearls to pigs. They will trample the pearls, then turn and attack you." Now, whenever we see imperfections in others, we are tempted to ignore our own. And when God does a work in someone else's life, the way I respond often reveals my spiritual health. I can choose to look at what God is doing in their life, or I can choose to see what God still needs to do. We can do either of those. See, if I'm not right with Jesus, my heart will be hard towards those who are receiving victory in Jesus. There are times we struggle or encounter difficulties, but in general, we all need victory. And receiving victory in Jesus is about submitting to the work He wants to do in our lives. Now, pigs will take things that are valuable and trample it. And there are people who, when they're not right with Jesus, will work to trample, frustrate, or ignore what Jesus is doing. So the kingdom of heaven is represented by pearls, and it calls us to a decision. Are we going to give our lives to the kingdom of heaven, or are we going to trample, frustrate, and ignore it? Now, when we think about pigs are actually very smart. Some scientists think that the only animals smarter than pigs are apes, dolphins, and elephants. So pigs are smart. But another thing we probably remember about pigs is they don't smell great. They stink. Now, we can get used to it, but that doesn't mean we necessarily like it. I don't know, maybe do you like the smell of pigs, Dan? Okay. Oh, he does. Okay. Because it's the smell of money, right? Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Pigs destroy things, particularly when they get bored. They look for something to get out their pent-up energy. They roll in the mud, and part of it, pigs don't sweat, and so to keep themselves cool, they roll in the mud, and they'll eat about anything. So they'll devour it. Those are some of the reputations that we have about pigs. But if we come back to the concept of pearl for just a moment, the inner lining of the oyster shell is the same material that actually forms the pearl. See, when an object, a foreign threat, enters the oyster, there's a perfect balance there. But this foreign object is a threat to that perfect balance. But the oyster knows how to solve the problem. It saturates this foreign threat with nacre, changing it. This object can no longer stay the same. It is transformed and thus now has value. That is what Jesus wants to do for us. See, the kingdom of heaven is perfect. It has a perfect balance. You and I are invited into the kingdom of heaven, into this place that has perfect balance, and we are a foreign threat because we are imperfect. But Jesus knows how to solve the problem. He saturates us with His grace, and more grace, and more grace, and more grace, so we are no longer the same. And we become part of this perfect balance that is the kingdom of heaven. But one of the things about this is that we are transformed into a way as though we're invited in the kingdom of heaven, but we're transformed into a way as though we were always meant to be there because we were. The redemptive plan of Jesus is not that, well, there's this random people that we got to help them out and get them to have some sense of value or worth. God created us to be with Him. And what Jesus is doing is restoring us so we can be with Him. That is the redemptive plan of Jesus. So even though we're imperfect, Jesus says, come into this place that's perfect, even though you're a threat to it. And I say threat, recognizing that we can't actually thwart God's plans, but that He says, you're not going to stay the same because this isn't what it was meant to be. You're going to be part of this perfect balance that is now the kingdom of heaven. But the gospel is confrontational. It calls us to a decision, whether we choose Jesus or reject Him. Now, choosing Jesus is not something we just did in the past. It's something we have to do every single day. Something we continually do. We choose Jesus today and today and today. And when we choose Jesus, what we're saying is, Jesus, I'm choosing to be a pebble, this foreign object, that I need to be saturated by your grace. I need you to change me into the priceless pearl that you promised to do. See, when we do not choose to submit to Jesus, we're in danger of becoming pigs that trample, frustrate, or ignore the work that Jesus is doing. The biggest thing that can get in the way of the movement of God is us. We are. We can get in the way of what God wants to do. But see, it's not enough for me to recognize that I am a mere pebble, desperate for the saturating grace of Jesus Christ. I must also recognize that you are a mere pebble, desperate for the saturating grace of Jesus Christ. Because if I forget that I need it and I forget that you need it, we have problems. We have disconnect. We become those pigs that are trampling what God is doing. Because if I forget that you need it, I'm focusing on the speck in your own eye and forgetting about the log in my own eye. So as we approach this new year, I have a question for you. Are you a pebble or are you a pig? See, a pebble is being transformed into this priceless thing that Jesus wants to do. See, if we're not careful, we can focus on the imperfections of others while ignoring our own. But when we come together as pebbles, together, desperate for the saturating grace of Jesus Christ, the kingdom of heaven is manifest among us. Now, the image of a pearl hopefully keeps us humble because it recognizing our insignificance together. It keeps us humble because we recognize it started as something that had no value. But each situation is different. And I want to make sure we recognize that we have different contexts, different situations, different issues that will come before us. But one of the principles that we believe is that in all circumstances, we can praise Jesus. It doesn't matter where you are. It doesn't matter what you're going through. And I think Paul and Silas in Acts chapter 16 really show this to us. Starting in verse 24, says, so the jailer put them, Paul and Silas, into the inner dungeon and clamped their feet in stocks. Around midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and the other prisoners were listening. Suddenly, there was a massive earthquake, and the prison was shaken to its foundation. All the doors immediately flew open, and the chains of every prisoner flew off, or fell off. You know, one of the things I want to pause just for a moment here is to recognize that prison in this time was different than prison today. Most of the time, when somebody was in prison during this time, they were just waiting death. That death was their only release. We see stories in the New Testament where someone's in prison and they are freed and released. And we say, oh, that's great. That was not normal. So Paul and Silas are in prison, praising Jesus, believing that death is probably their only release from the situation. See, regardless of your circumstances, you are not only able to, but you are called to praise Jesus. See, praising Jesus is not passive. Praising Jesus is not about liking the song or even knowing the song. Praising Jesus is not about how you feel. It's not about what's going on in your life. Praising Jesus is because he is worthy of praise. So I hope you are willing to focus on being a pebble instead of a pig. But I also recognize that you're going to encounter pigs. You're going to encounter people that are working against or are resistant to the work in the movement of Jesus. But instead of getting caught up in how we are dissatisfied with that person or how that person might be better, what if we focus on praising Jesus? See, as Paul and Silas tell us, praise opens prison doors. Not just for those who were singing, but for every prisoner who's in chains, because all were freed. When you praise Jesus, you will be freed from that which binds. And your praising can be instrumental in freeing others from that which binds. So are you a pebble or are you a pig? In all circumstances, we praise Jesus because praise opens prison doors.